Some of my favorite things to read to relax are Silver Age Superman, Superboy, Supergirl, or Legion of Superheroes comics. And I was curious about what exactly contributes to that comfortable feeling that these stories give me in particular when compared to Golden Age or Modern Age books. And I was thinking besides some really obvious stuff like the stories being simpler than modern ones, because I don't think that's the only reason. Some reasons are quite broad, but some are specifically about certain titles, and some carry over into the Golden Age and Bronze Age too. The first thing that stuck out to me was clothing. Modern comic art often makes superhero costumes look completely skin tight, like they're painted on. In the Silver Age, you'll often see wrinkle lines on costumes, making them seem a little looser. This trend had been present from the Golden Age to some degree, with characters like Flash and Green Lantern wearing clearly non-skin tight clothing back then. And in the Silver Age, the new Green Lantern suit acted like cloth sometimes too in the earliest appearances, and it had more of a matte black finish to the black parts of the costume, rather than being colored to shine and define his muscles underneath it, so it can look more velvety than like latex or something, which you'll see in modern art sometimes. And the Legion of Superheroes is a great example of all of this because they look like they're wearing clothes for costumes instead of battle suits that cling to their skin. Sunboy and Invisible Kid look like they're just wearing sweaters, and Jor-El in the Superman comics is the same way. Then you have small details like how Lightning Lad's cape is often shown connecting all the way to the front of his collar, which seems soft and comfortable because it's draping directly over his skin. In general, the characters just look more comfortable with what they're wearing. Modern comic art often has characters in intense poses of impact. Their limbs are completely extended, and it creates a sense of muscle tension in the body of the character. Now, Silver Age comic art often shows characters with softer motions, almost like they're in-between poses. The most prevalent and memorable example is Superman, with his flying arms, which instead of being tensely extended forward, they have a little bend at the elbow, especially when Kurt Swan was drawing it. Like, Kurt Swan's Superman when he's flying looks really gentle. So characters showing muscle tension, I think, probably leads to a more intense atmosphere, while watching someone who looks more relaxed is probably more relaxing to a reader. From what I've read, there's less outright punching of other human beings in the Silver Age Superman and Legion books. Sometimes the solution to the story's problem is not beating up the villain, but something more clever that isn't centered around violence. Like in Brainiac's first appearance, the resolution of the story isn't even beating Brainiac physically. He puts himself into suspended animation, and the climax of the story is Superman escaping from Kandor. And in the dramatic climax, a Kandorian makes the hard choice to restore Superman to his normal size instead of scaling Kandor back to its normal size, because they can only resize one thing, and he figures that Superman is more important as a superhero. So, oftentimes the story is veered away from fighting and made the conflict about something else, especially in the Superman books. And I think the tamer levels of violence probably helped the Silver Age be less intense. Now, some characters like the Atom had a bit more brawling going on, but I assume the creators in the comics code were more lenient with him because he only fought people in his tiny form, so it seemed less intense and less realistic, even though I know he was still hitting people with a lot of force. It didn't have as much of a violent atmosphere, even though he was still fighting. Besides the stories themselves being a bit juvenile, there are some smaller details that provide a childlike feel to the Silver Age, and childlike things are pretty generally relaxing. There's a good deal of writing in older comics, like signs or notes within the narrative, and they look like they're written by hand. They look really juvenile to me. A good example are the Legion's name cards, or the entrance on the Legion clubhouse. This might sound niche, but these writings appear more than you'd think. There's also the fact that there were several young characters introduced. Superboy, Supergirl, Super Baby, the Legion of Superheroes, Robin, Aqualad, Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, and Speedy. They were all actual children characters, active during the Silver Age. There were plenty of sound friendships in the Silver Age too, especially with Superman and Batman finally meeting and then teaming up in World's Finest, and the JLA and the Teen Titans starting. Now, more specifically, one of the most wholesome things that DC ever did, in my opinion, was introduce Earth 2, This is relegated mostly to some crossover issues in certain titles, and then the annual crossovers in JLA, where the JLA met the Justice Society every year. Now, Earth 2 heroes started to meet the Earth 1 heroes, and I think this might have given a nice sense of comfort and camaraderie because they would always meet and be all respectful, and by the Bronze Age they were even just hanging out casually at the Watchtower, like proper friends. So there's this whole universe of heroes out there who are all friends with the characters we know from Earth 1, so it's like this big community. And I think seeing characters engaged in friendships may have helped readers identify the characters in their minds as friendly. This is a pretty specific one, but characters' eyes, like Wonder Woman's and Superman's, seem to become larger when compared to the Golden Age. I think this is a salient point because bigger eyes are more readable and can give more away, and often malignant characters will have smaller, cunning eyes. The whites of Superman's eyes became visible way more often by the Silver Age, and that's a lot friendlier than the squint that he had in the early Golden Age. I think this had an effect on how he was characterized overall too, because late 30s Superman was not the nicest guy, and he wouldn't have had such welcoming eyes as the hero of the 50s and 60s, the Silver Age in general. And finally, I'd consider this the weakest contributor because it can apply to pretty much all popular comics. Most comics have consistent settings, usually cities like Metropolis or Gotham, and that helps give a feeling of familiarity, and I think we derive comfort from that. In the Silver Age in particular, I just want to point out Smallville as the epitome of a comfortable and well-known setting. It's very unassuming. It makes the stories feel less like adventures or journeys that are full of danger and more like day-to-day life that happens to be exceptional and a little bit dramatic. I think that daily life soap opera feel was also kind of brought back in the 90s Superman comics, which I haven't read that much of, but they also give a similar feeling of comfort because you know the environment so intimately. I think sitcoms probably benefit from this because they usually have a few key locations that the audience becomes really familiar with. And when people talk about comfort shows, they usually mention sitcoms as well. There are probably some things I'm missing and some things that could be elaborated on, but this was a brief little analysis of the Silver Age of comics, trying to figure out what exactly makes them so comfortable. If you're looking for any late night reading, I'd definitely recommend Silver Age DC Comics.